Airthium started as a way to commercialize an engine. It's a new kind of engine that converts electricity to heat and heat to electricity.
Hello, and welcome to the Hard Tech Podcast. I am your host, Daniel Apo, and sitting across from me today is Andrei Klochko.
Hi, Daniel.
Hi, thanks for being here today, Andrei. Please give us a description of your background and tell us about Airthium and the technology that your company has developed.
Yeah, so I live in France. I'm a physicist by training. I completed a PhD in plasma physics back in 2014. After that, I started Airthium almost right away. So Airthium isn't my first idea. I had 3 more ideas before that. Different startups in different sectors, but this is the one that really took off. By the time I had the idea, 2.5 months later, I had my first grant, and then another grant a few months after that. The idea behind Airthium is really to do something about the energy. Our world exists because we are able to manipulate energy as we please, and I wanted to do something to make that more renewable, durable, sustainable. There was something in the world from the 20th century, that just felt wrong to me, that we needed to update for us to have some kind of long-term future, really.
Okay, thanks for explaining that. In terms of the technology, can you provide like an overview of what it is, just generally speaking?
Airthium started as a way to commercialize an engine. It's a new kind of engine that converts electricity to heat and heat to electricity. This really is the core of what we're doing. Then, how is it applied in the real world? The main product, the one thing we're building now, is what we call a heat pump. So a heat pump is something that harvests heat somewhere and puts it somewhere else. Just like a water pump can take water from downhill to uphill.
Okay.
It's the natural way for water to go is downhill, and the pump makes it go uphill. Here it's the same, but for heat. So you can heat a house with a heat pump today. It's 3 times more efficient than a resistor instead of natural gas. So it's an electric heating that is much more efficient than a resistive heating. That's what a heat pump is. And so we apply this for industrial heat, really. So it's to make steam, it's to make hot air. Any kind of industry, usually it's food and agro industry. They cook things, they boil things, they sterilize things, and they need a lot of steam to do that, and hot air. So we supply this steam and hot air in a much more efficient and sustainable way.
Fantastic. So why is this necessary? I mean, why do we all need this type of technology, and what's the motivation behind this?
There is a very good comic book from a guy named Jean-Marc Jancovici. It's in French, but it's probably been translated by now, which tells about how much energy are humans commanding and how this amount grows over time very quickly.
Okay.
Today, we are using so much energy everywhere, and most of this energy still comes from fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are a very efficient source of energy. Then it has 2 problems. It's limited in time. Eventually, they will run out. Of course, it's still a long ways from now, but it will happen. And then there is the problem of CO2 emissions, how it acidifies the oceans, and how it heats up the climate, how it can essentially kill a lot of species by modifying their environment very, very quickly.
Okay.
So that's essentially why we're building this, to make things more sustainable and less impactful to our biosphere as a whole.
Okay. That's very interesting. So the overall goal of this technology is to decarbonize the planet, basically.
Yes. We start by something which are those heat pumps in the industry. And this is because it's a very profitable first market. Essentially, we are opening a gate between electricity and heat in a very efficient way. Before that, industrial companies had the choice between natural gas and electricity, but only resistors.
Okay.
Natural gas used to be a lot cheaper, so it made sense. But now, in Europe, gas will stay expensive for a long time, and carbon tax is coming very fast.
Okay.
So to them, they actually want to save money. That's their primary driver. But also to be decarbonized. And those two drivers kind of combine very efficiently now to make for a great market for those heat pumps.
So explain to me, is this technology available or ready for markets outside of Europe?
It could. Actually, some companies in the US are interested. It's just that it's easier for us to sell this when there is a big carbon tax, because then it becomes massive. Then everybody wants it. Whereas here in the US for now, it's going to be brands that rely on their green image to really to sell and to sell at a premium. Just like you buy organic and it's more expensive, but you're okay with it because it's more respectful both of the earth and of your body when you eat it.
A few days ago, I was looking at a list of some of the most polluted cities in the world. And cities like Los Angeles, Ho Chi Minh, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right.
Ho Chi Minh, maybe.
Ho Chi Minh, yeah. My bad, if you're from Vietnam. But you think if this technology was available, say, 30 years ago, 40 years ago, and was widely used, this list will be a lot less shorter, and cities like Los Angeles will be out of it?
So it's very specific. There are many causes of pollution. We are addressing a big one where our segment of the market with heat pump is 3% of worldwide CO2 emissions. So that's already a very big thing. It's $13 billion per year as a market, even though this is for a very conservative cost. It could be a lot higher. For Los Angeles and city pollution, there are cars. Cars are electrified now. Couldn't have happened before because lithium-ion needed to take off. The unit cost of lithium-ion batteries dropped down so many times since they were invented. And that's why electric cars are taking off now, only because of that. And then there is plastic. Plastic is also a very big problem, especially in some countries. You see it everywhere. And there is no easy solution to that. The best solution is just to reuse as much as you can. Deploy delivery businesses where everything is shipped in stainless steel reusable containers. And delivery people come and just take the old containers, sterilize them, and fill them with protective gas when they put, for example, if you put meat or vegetables inside, you can put some nitrogen gas so that it doesn't spoil. You can't do that as an individual because it requires big machinery, but they could do that at a central facility. And using reusable steel containers already exists, for example, in India. It's just a matter of scaling that and deploying that to other categories of goods that we buy every day.
Okay, that's interesting. So this seems like a multifaceted solution to get to depollution, if you will.
Yeah, to depollute, you must combine many different solutions. Our solution is heat pumps. Other companies have to do the other solutions, essentially.
That's interesting. I'm sure at this point, people are wondering, how does this actually work? I mean...
Okay. How does a heat pump work?
Exactly.
Right? Yeah. So it's really like taking water from downhill to uphill. Let's say you have a bucket. If you lower it below the surface of the bottom lake, you'll take water in. If you then grab it and drag it to the top of the mountain and over the top lake, you can pour the water in there. That's actually how energy is stored in the energy grid. Two dams in series connected by a pipe. When you need electricity, you let the pipe run down. When you store electricity, you turn up the engine as a motor and you push the water up. So it stores energy again. Here it's exactly the same. You expand the gas. So when you expand the gas, it becomes colder. The heat, for example, from the outside will go in. Let's say you have a heat pump in a house. A heat pump, for example, in Asia, there are a lot of ACs, right, that make the air cooler. And some of them are reversible. So they can also make your house hotter. If you look at your AC, sometimes you have heating and cooling modes. And those are really the two sides of the same coin. And you can... So you expand the gas outside the house. It takes heat from the already cold air to make it even colder. And then the gas goes into your house and you compress it. And it's like drying a towel, right? You squish it and then the water comes out. So here is the same. You press and the heat will go out inside your house. So this is a simple way to do that. Now, instead of a house, we don't target houses, we target steam boilers. hot air generators for drying. They're a lot hotter.
Okay.
Typically 200 degrees Celsius or 400 degrees Fahrenheit, something like this. So it's the same principle, except we go much higher in temperature. And that's actually our core value proposition. We are the only heat pump that goes that high at this efficiency. There are very few heat pumps to go that high temperature, even in labs. And we are doing one that not only does that, but does that at high efficiency.
That's interesting. So basically, a heat pump, by my understanding, and hopefully for the audience, is you transfer heat from a coldish sauce to a hot sauce, to a hot sink, if you will. But you need some energy to do that.
Yeah, you need to supply a little bit of electricity.
Okay, there you go.
In a way, another way to think about this, you probably heard that a nuclear reactor is very inefficient. It converts a lot of its energy to waste heat. Those big white clouds above nuclear reactors, they're not pollution, they're just water, but it's a lot of heat energy that has to be rejected.
Okay.
It's about 2/3 of the energy is rejected this way. And it's not a fatality. It's not like it's lost. It's just a transformation in one direction, and then you have to invert it. You can actually invert it. So a heat pump is a heat engine in reverse, really.
Okay.
Instead of transforming heat to electricity and lower temperature heat, like a generator, you do the opposite. You take low temperature heat and electricity and remake high temperature heat with it.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Heat pumps, heat engines. Okay. All right. What direction of conversion or transfer is more efficient? Is it heat to electricity or electricity to heat?
So that's a good question. Actually, in our case, we can do both, and they're both quite efficient. It's all a matter of, do you make things irreversible? For example, there was this great movie called Mr. Nobody. And at the beginning of the movie, they have a whole
with Bob Odenkirk or something like that.
It's with Jared Leto. I don't know if
Jared Leto. Okay.
Yeah,
Mr. Nobody.
It's basically the 3 possible lives of a kid whose parents are getting divorced, and he's basically living all those 3 lives in parallel in the movies, and all the scenes are thrown together, and they have some kind of thing going on about time and irreversibility.
Okay.
And so at first the kid says, okay, if you put ketchup in your mashed potatoes and you mix them, you can't unmix them. It's forever. It's a way to explain what entropy is.
Yes. When
you make chaos, you have to spend to create more chaos elsewhere to unmake the chaos you've made.
True.
This is a very broad topic. It's very profound, actually. We could talk for hours about entropy. It's kind of the driving force of the universe. And when we transform energy in our engines, we try to create as little entropy as possible, to create as little irreversibility as possible, so that everything that we make can be unmade.
Fantastic. I want to ask a slightly more technical question.
Mm-hmm.
You say, or I've heard you say, that this relies on the Erickson cycle.
Yeah.
Right? Which my understanding is the difference between the Erickson cycle and the Stirling cycle is the isobaric versus isovolumetric. So how does the constant pressure replacement of the constant volume parts of the cycle make your heat pump better?
Yeah, so this is a very specific side of our cycle. It's really, so in a Stirling engine, you compress a gas inside a hot cylinder. Then it becomes hotter, you extract the heat, and then you push that gas, which in our case is helium, to the cold side, to the cold cylinder. And when it goes there, it goes through a tiny tube, which is called a regenerator.
Okay.
And the regenerator, think of it as if you go into a nightclub in the winter. You leave all your coats at the coat room, and then you go dance. When you come back, you take your coat back, and you go outside to the cold.
Okay.
Here it's kind of the same. The gas comes in and leaves its heat at the door, going into the cold side. Then when it comes back from the cold side, it will take that heat back from the walls. Actually, our nose does exactly that. In cold winter, when we breathe inside our body is warm, and then when the air comes out, it's already colder because our nose is not at 37 degrees Celsius, it's colder. So it also acts as a little bit of a regenerator, which helps us not lose too much heat in the winter. And then on the cold side, so you compress the gas and you extract the heat, and then you ship the gas to the hot side, and you compress on the hot side, expand on the cold side. That's the heat pump cycle. And so the difference between Stirling and Erickson, in Stirling, both cylinders have the same size. Because the gas is colder, it has less pressure on the cold side.
Okay.
The advantage of having the same size of cylinder is that basically the movements of your pistons are the same, so you can have counteracting pistons, stuff like this. The advantage of the Erickson cycle is that when you transfer the gas to the cold side, because it's isobaric, there is no change in pressure, so there is no heating or cooling during transfer. Okay. So you don't have those parasitic entropy creation moments where every time you compress or expand the gas, it will try to heat and cool down. In our case, we do this thing called fast near isothermal gas compression. So we compress the gas and we extract the heat so fast it doesn't have time to heat up the gas by more than 20 degrees Celsius instead of 300 normally. And this is also why it's more efficient. Thermodynamics says that when you transfer energy from between two bodies, for example, if I take this bottle and my hand is warmer, if my hand were 300 degrees, right, super hot, then I would create a lot of entropy. Like the amount of entropy per unit of energy I transfer would be higher. And so here, because the gas is almost the same temperature as the walls, I don't create any entropy, almost none. And that's kind of the core of what we do. And so if the gas strays away from that temperature too far and too often, it will create entropy. So during transfer, if you expand because you go into the same volume and it's lower pressure, you'll make the gas colder. So heat transfer and a little bit of irreversibility there.
Is that what makes it very efficient? The fast.
Fast near isothermal compression. This is our core technology. This is the biggest reason why it's efficient.
Okay, so that fast isothermal compression. Ensures that you're pretty much close to isentropy.
Isothermal or adiabatic are two ways to achieve isentropy. Isentropy is no loss.
Okay, this has become very technical. So if you were lost there, this is a lot of thermodynamics right there. Okay, moving on. In terms of decarbonizing the planet and making power plants efficient, making power plants less polluting, we know energy cannot be created or destroyed. Energy can only be converted, right? Or it can be generated from one form into another. How do you think power plants, how can they help us use some of the heat that has been lost for home usage, for outdoor usage, camping, things like that? How do you think that could work?
Actually, what you're mentioning is something that's been used extensively in former Soviet Union countries and Nordic countries, which is combined heat and power plants. It's typically where you have a gas-fired or coal-fired or nuclear power plant, and then the waste heat, instead of being vented to the atmosphere, is used to heat up the houses.
Okay.
That's called district heating as well, is when you have a lot of pipes transporting the heat. That actually works. Now, if we really want to do something about power plants that are inefficient, I think the best way would be to try to find a way to make it renewable. For example, there are those fun facts. A large part of the electricity in Indonesia comes from geothermal. So instead of gas or coal, they just use geothermal energy. That works. There is a company called Quaise which tries to drill big boreholes with a very fancy microwave drill to get deep enough to get very high temperature steam out of the ground and make some kind of dependable energy. The problem here is that solar and wind are great and they're actually renewable, but they burn when they please. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. If you look at the data, which is open source in France, of when is solar and wind operating in France, you'll see that sometimes sun and wind die together. When I say die, I say they produce much less energy than they should, sometimes half, sometimes 1/3, and that can last for 2 weeks.
Okay.
and then one more week a little bit later. So if you model all of that together, you see that just like we have granaries, to store grain over to the winter, we need to have some granaries for energy. So some very, very long-term battery
Okay.
to compensate for this long-term variability of solar and wind. And today, to do that, we use natural gas reserves. If you take all the short-term reserves of natural gas in the US that are immediately accessible, no matter what, even world war happens, they still have those reserves. They could last 4 months of electricity production. So that's how long fossil fuels can stay online just based on the reserves immediately accessible to a country. And if we want to replace coal, gas, and nuclear by renewables, we need to have the same kind of autonomy, same kind of range. And no battery today can do that. There is only one, which is hydrogen in underground caverns. And this can only happen in some places. Japan has 0 salt caverns. China only has them on 5% of its territory. Even the US, we have them in many places, but not everywhere. And the US grid is notorious for not being that well interconnected. So being able to store anywhere would be great.
Why the hydrogen? You said hydrogen tanks or something?
Hydrogen in salt caverns.
Okay.
Underground geological formations.
Why are they? Oh, okay. That's where they are. That's where you get them from.
Yeah.
Okay. That's the source.
Yeah.
I was thinking about the dangers because a lot has been said about hydrogen and how hydrogen can be used to power cars and maybe even other things that we use. But is there a reason why we don't have that around right now?
So it turns out that lithium ion was faster to scale than hydrogen. About hydrogen, what I believe now is that there is a lot of pressure in Europe, for example, to make hydrogen happen. Also in the US, we have that too. It's several things really. It's first, hydrogen can be made in a renewable way. So if you build a hydrogen pipeline, you have a guarantee that you will be able to operate it forever, essentially. At the same time, there are ways to make hydrogen from hydrocarbons. And this is actually great for the oil and gas industry because you can but there are 2 ways to make hydrogen from hydrocarbons. One is the polluting existing way, which makes a lot of CO2 when you split methane into CO2 and hydrogen. But there is a way called pyrolysis or plasmolysis, where you separate it into solid carbon and hydrogen without oxygen. That's very special, and it requires either very high temperatures or some help, for example, from plasma or something else. I actually have a friend who does just that. His company name is called Spark. He's also his team is also from Paris, and that would be great for oil and gas because suddenly they would make decarbonized hydrogen from just natural gas with less primary energy demand than electrolysis, and that's their goal. Which is why they're subsidizing this. They know eventually they could get away with it. And it's not essentially a bad thing because once you have the hydrogen pipelines, then when natural gas does run out, you can always replace by electrolyzers, and then you are sustainable. And for all the time when you did this plasmolysis thing, well, okay, it wasn't renewable, but you don't create CO2. And there is also a last difference between hydrogen and ammonia, hydrogen and methane, sorry. Methane is a very potent greenhouse gas. And hydrogen isn't. So that's also a good thing.
Okay. Wow. It's a lot there. You mentioned having your friend in Paris who also is doing something in the same space. I wonder, there are a lot of hardware, companies outside of the US. More outside of the US than within the US if you compare hardware to software, for example. And I've always found that to be very fascinating. All right. So at this point, I would like you to tell the people, how they can support the mission, how they can find you. Go ahead.
Yeah. So our mission really is to decarbonize the planet and then eventually do something about other kinds of waste. That's why we're here. We're here for the long term. There is no planet B, despite what Elon can say with Mars. What I like to say about going to Mars. Okay, you go to Mars.
There is no planet B.
Yeah, you go to Mars. You go to Titan. Okay, maybe Europe. Europa is a satellite of one of the outer planets. And then what? You go to another star? Sorry, it's kind of far away.
So you prefer us to fix Earth
Exactly.
than to try to go to Mars?
Yeah, we only have one planet that we can actually do something about at large scale, and essentially time is running out. Last very big extinction of species was the Permian extinction 250 million years ago. Trilobites died, 95% of all marine life died. It took millions of years to recover. I don't believe that scientists will be able to fix biodiversity just by genetic engineering. I just don't buy it. So once we finish sowing the branch on which we seated, eventually things might get tough. And tough in a way that will be very, very hard to fix. So that's what I want to avoid, and the time for that is now. So we are Airthium, Airthium, like air and lithium, but without the li. And we have a current campaign on WeFunder. It's a equity crowdfunding platform, so anybody can invest. And the campaign is live now. That's the best way to support us, essentially. Then you can also talk about us to your friends. We are also looking for clients, essentially factory owners who would like to decarbonize what they're building, to make steam without burning natural gas, to reduce their CO2 emissions, especially essentially Scope 1, but also Scope 2 and 3, because we do that as well. So yeah, that's about it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Andrei, for being here
Thank
today.
you, David.
This was a very interesting, insightful discussion. Again, this is Andrei Klochko, co-founder and CEO of Airthium. Airthium has developed a very innovative heat pump technology that is reversible and is the future, especially if we want to fix Earth instead of going to Mars.
Exactly.
Like he said. All right. This has been another episode of the Hard Tech Podcast. I'll see you all on the next one. If you enjoyed this episode, please like and share this video. Also subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so that you see more videos like this.